What's going on, everybody? It is December in Texas, and it is my perfect riding weather. It's about 63 degrees, so it's a little bit brisk. Bike seems like it runs a little bit better with a little bit cooler weather. This is absolutely my favorite time. Hoodie and some gloves, and it is good to go for me. So this is 96 Road King Part 2. And if you saw my Facebook post, you know that some things have changed. And not really for the better. So this is my first update on owning the 96 Road King, and obviously I'm not riding it, so something's up with it. So I bought the Road King, like I said in the last video. If you haven't watched it, I'll put it up here somewhere. Bought the Road King from a little independent dealer. Where is as is, no warranty. I mean, and they were pretty explicit about it. They're like, we can't finance this bike, it's too old, we can't warranty it. We did the best we could. We put a battery and some tires, and we looked it over, and he said, you know, there's some little things that need to be addressed with it, but nothing major that we found. So I rode it for a couple of days, and I pretty quickly realized it had an oil leak, and I was kicking myself for somehow not realizing during the test drive that it had this oil leak. I have no clue how I missed it, but I did, and I found out that the longer that I rode it, the more issue the oil leak was becoming. It was getting to the point where it was just leaking really bad. So you can see right in there, so obviously it's pretty wet with oil. You can see that there's some oil that's gone down the header. The oil is pretty obvious back there on the oil filter, and you can kind of see that it's being blown back down the bike. You'd go ride for 20 minutes, and then when you'd park the bike, it would smoke because the oil was burning off the front cylinder exhaust manifold. So it got to the point, I'm like, okay, I've got some handlebars I want to put on it anyway. I'm going to take it to Harley and we'll get it fixed. Looking at it closely, to me, it seemed like the rocker box gasket was leaking. So the oil was coming from above the exhaust manifold, not below it, which is indicative of a head gasket if it's below it. So decided take it into Harley, and so I did. And the service writer took it in and looked at it and said, hey, yeah, it's definitely a rocker box gasket. We'll take a look at it, ride it. We have a tech that works on Evos still, and he owns an Evo, so he knows what he's doing, and we'll let him ride it and get everything sorted out with it. So cool. No issue there. I get a call pretty much immediately the next morning from the service writer that says, hey, you know, your base gaskets are leaking, which is like the Evo plague. Like, it just, every Evo at some point will have base gasket leak issues. I didn't really notice it, but he said it wasn't that bad, but he really didn't want to go in and replace upper gaskets if we were just going to eventually have to go in and replace the lower gaskets, because it would be like doing it twice. So he said, hey, it's going to be a little bit more, but you might as well get it done right so it doesn't have any oil leaks at all. He said also, not to freak you out or anything, but he says, I hear a little bit of a lifter noise that you may not have noticed that is giving me a little bit of concern about what's going on in this motor. He says it seems to ride okay, doesn't smoke or anything, but he said that the drivetrain should be a little bit quieter. He said, and I said, well, you know, I didn't hear it. And he said, you know, if you're not used to working on Evos, it's not something that would have been too prevalent. He said it might not be anything, I'll let you know. So I get a call a couple days later and said, hey, you know, we're pulling it apart and we're starting to see some daunting signs that this motor's got issues. He said one of the valves didn't look very good. He said that there was oil in the head. He said that either the head is cracked or that we've got some kind of bigger issue with the motor. And so just I'm seeing dollar signs in my head. Pretty much is what's going on. It just keeps getting more and more expensive. To get in there and do the base gaskets and the rocker gaskets and maybe replace some tappets and stuff, it was going to be, you know, $1,200 or something, plus the handlebars. So I was already looking at a decent repair bill. But if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it right. Like, I don't want it to leak oil. You know, I've been known not to keep my bikes very long, so if I go in and fix something, I want to fix it right so that the next owner doesn't have to worry about it, or if I keep it a long time, that I don't have to worry about it. I want it done the right way. So I told them, hey, whatever it needs, just get it done and we'll figure it out. Well, I get the call in the next couple days that says, hey, we've got the whole top end of the motor and a lot of the bottom end and the cam chest and stuff taken apart. We want you to come in and go over it with the tech. Which is, I knew right away that when they call you and tell you to come go over something with the tech, there is no good news that's going to come from that. So I'm already bummed. I'm already knowing that, like, my, you know, $6,000 motorcycle is going to need a lofty expense to get it back to where it needs to be. So I go in there and I'll show you guys some video. And the tech's great. He's worked on some of my stuff before. Like, I totally trust him, and he walked me through everything. And sure enough, what had happened was, and it was funny, I'll tell you in a minute, but so either the cam bearing came apart, which is pretty typical of those motors if you when you start getting up into the 40, 50, 60,000 mile range and they don't get warmed up or whatever, or part of the cam itself came apart, and it sent some little chunks of metal through the rest of the motor and pretty much trashed everything in its path. I mean, it messed up all kinds of stuff. The pistons, the rods all had damage on them. I mean, not like catastrophic, but to the point of where you're not going to put it back together. I mean, it's a time bomb. The bike had an aftermarket cam, and the tech said that they'd put some valve guides in there, and one of the valves had failed, and basically just no good news. So they said, you know, hey, we can rebuild the top end and do the some of the bottom end stuff and slap it all back together. That'd be your cheapest option. But for me, it just doesn't make sense. If I'm gonna spend a ton of money on a repair job, I'm just gonna put a crate motor in it for a couple of reasons. One, 40,000 miles, if it really has that many issues, I don't want to cobble something back together. A, you get no resale value out of it. You're selling a bike and it has a factory rebuilt motor and you give them receipts, you're going to get little to nothing out of the resale at all. Two, the cost between rebuilding most of the motor and just putting an S&S crate motor in the thing, it is not that big of a difference. So I sat down and looked, and I decided that I'm going to put the S&S V80 stock replacement crate motor in it. It's nothing crazy. It's still 80 inches. It is basically a Harley Evo. It's based on a Harley Evo. It's identical. The only difference is that crate motor has, you know, some mild performance stuff. It's got a mild S&S 508 cam, which is a cam for, you know, lower compression motors. It's a pretty low compression. It's got some heads on it. It's got forged lifters and some better parts, and it's brand new, and it's got a warranty. So I just decided that if I was going to do it, I was going to do it right. If I was going to spend the money, I wanted to put a brand new motor in it so that I don't ever have to worry about it again. But the expense that comes with that is pretty, it's kind of jaw-dropping, to be honest. You know, I went in expecting to spend a few $1,000s. Just the motor itself is about $4,600 for the long block. We're going to reuse my stock Harley carb because evidently, I don't know this to be true, this is what I got told, evidently the stock Harley CV carb adjusts better to altitude. And me taking 2 trips to Colorado every year, they said it was something that, you know, I would like to have the CV carb that adjusts to altitude and not have to worry about the S&S. giving me trouble when I rode up in the mountains. So I bought the long block, I bought the ignition, even though I could probably run the stock ignition on that motor. It's nothing wild. But I figure if you've got the bike completely apart and you've got a 24-year-old ignition system, for 300, 400 bucks, let's just replace it. You might as well, you're in it, it's just money at this point. Let's get it done right. So I've got the S&S ignition and the motor on order. On top of that, I've got 16-inch ape hangers going on it, and I've got a set of white wall tires. Actually, that was kind of something that. Watch out for this truck. This curve is terrible. That was kind of something that was last minute. I saw a bike that I really liked on Instagram that I think is the same year Road King with like the same paint job, and it had white walls and chrome apes, and it looked really damn good. So that's the look that I'm going to try to go for. And so I got some white walls for it. So I'm excited to see, you know, what it looks like after the tires and the bars and all that. So I don't know how much longer it's going to be. We ordered the motor another couple of days ago, but all it means for you guys is kind of a change in plans. You know, I bought the bike to show you what a cheap Harley was like with the old 80-inch Evo, to explore that motor, kind of like I've done the twin cam on this one. And I kind of got a lesson in what used bikes can do to you. High mileage bikes, you never know. It looks good. It looks like it's been taken care of. It rode fine on my test drive, and lo and behold, it's got major issues, and now we're putting an entire motor in it. So I'm going to change up what I do. We're going to talk about breaking in a new crate motor. We're going to do a lot about the S&S motor that goes in it. It's still an 80-inch Evo, so it'll sound similar, and we'll look at the, I think they're going to put it on the dyno, and see how similar the power is to the Milwaukee 8 Street Glide I had. Because with the cam and heads and you know, that new motor, it's going to make decent horsepower for an Evo. I'd say probably, you know, mid to high 70s, probably. I might be dreaming a little bit because the compression is still 8.5 to 1, but it's going to make good power for what it is, and it's going to be way more reliable than it probably would have been with that ticking time bomb of a motor that we had no clue when it was going to go. So bummed out for sure, but excited to have a really cool project that's going to have a brand new S&S motor in it that I can ride the crap out of and take you guys along for breaking in the motor, and still get to do, you know, some 80-inch Evo stuff. It's not going to be a stock 80-inch Evo anymore. That kind of got ruined. But it's still going to be fun. I appreciate you guys watching the channel. Keep up with it. As soon as I get an update on the motor or whatever, I'll put out another video. If you have any questions or have any advice for me, always put it in the comments. I appreciate you all watching, and I'll see you on the next update of this bike.